Deep in the Montana wilderness where cell towers don't reach and the nearest hospital is 3 hours away, experienced hunter Jake Morrison thought he'd seen everything the mountains could throw at him. With 25 years of hunting under his belt, he'd tracked wounded animals, survived blizzards, and helped lost hikers find their way home. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for what he would discover on that crisp October morning, when a woman's desperate cries echoed through the pine trees. What started as a routine elk hunt would become a race against time that would test everything Jake thought he knew about survival, medicine, and the terrifying secrets that nature sometimes keeps hidden in plain sight. The morning mist clung to the mountainside like a gray blanket as Jake Morrison adjusted his rifle strap and checked his compass one more time. October in the Montana Rockies was unpredictable, and the weather forecast had mentioned possible snow flurries by afternoon. At 52, Jake had learned to respect the mountain's moods. His weathered hands, scarred from years of outdoor work, moved with practiced efficiency as he secured his gear. Jake had been hunting these particular mountains for over 2 decades. He knew every ridge, every game trail, every watering hole within a 15-mile radius of his base camp. The locals in the small town of Pine Ridge called him Mountain Jake, and for good reason. He'd helped search and rescue teams find lost hikers more times than he could count, and his knowledge of wilderness survival had saved lives. This hunting season had been different, though. The elk seemed spooked, moving in unusual patterns that didn't match their typical behavior. Jake had noticed it 3 days ago when he first arrived at his usual camping spot near Crystal Lake. The animals were avoiding certain areas entirely, which was strange because those spots had reliable water sources and good grazing. As he climbed higher up the rocky slope, following what looked like fresh elk tracks, Jake's trained ear picked up something that made him stop dead in his tracks. Through the dense stand of lodgepole pines ahead, he could hear what sounded like human voices. That was impossible. This area was at least 8 miles from the nearest trail, and Jake hadn't seen another soul since he'd left his truck at the trailhead yesterday morning. The voices grew clearer as he moved closer, staying low and using the trees for cover. Years of hunting had taught him to move silently through the forest, placing each step carefully to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. What he heard made his blood run cold. "Please, I can't feel my legs properly," a woman's voice called out, high-pitched with panic and exhaustion. Something's wrong. Really wrong. Jake's military training from his younger days kicked in immediately. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning to Montana to work as a wilderness guide and hunting outfitter. The tone in that woman's voice triggered every protective instinct he'd developed, both in combat and in the mountains. Moving closer, Jake could see a small clearing ahead where the morning sun broke through the tree canopy. In the center of the clearing, he spotted them, a young couple in their 30s, both wearing expensive hiking gear that looked brand new. The woman was sitting on a fallen log, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her male companion knelt beside her, his hand shaking as he tried to comfort her. Jake observed them for several minutes before revealing himself. Something about the scene didn't add up. Their gear was top of the line but showed no signs of extended use. Their hiking boots were barely scuffed. Most telling of all, they had no backpacks, no water bottles, no survival equipment whatsoever. How had they gotten this deep into the wilderness without basic supplies? "Hello there," Jake called out in a calm, non-threatening voice as he stepped into the clearing. "I'm Jake Morrison. I heard someone calling for help." The man jumped to his feet, his eyes wide with a mixture of relief and something else Jake couldn't quite identify. Fear? Guilt? "Oh, thank God," the man said, his voice cracking. "We've been lost for hours. My girlfriend Sarah, she's been having problems with her legs. She says she can't feel them right." Jake approached slowly, keeping his rifle pointed safely toward the ground. Up close, he could see that Sarah was indeed in distress. Her legs were visibly trembling, and she kept trying to stand, only to immediately sit back down. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, classic signs of panic or physical distress. "Unexperienced with wilderness medicine," Jake said, kneeling down to Sarah's eye level. "Can you tell me exactly what you're feeling?" "It started about 2 hours ago. First, it was just like pins and needles in my feet, but now it's moved up to my knees, and I can barely stand. The trembling won't stop, and I'm getting dizzy." Jake's mind raced through possibilities. Heat exhaustion was unlikely given the cool morning temperature. Dehydration was possible, but her symptoms seemed too severe and specific. He'd seen similar symptoms before, but in very different circumstances. "What's your name?" Jake asked the man. "Marcus. Marcus Chen. We're from Seattle. We came up here for a romantic weekend getaway, just a day hike, but we got turned around somehow." Something in Marcus's story bothered Jake, but he pushed the feeling aside for now. Sarah needed immediate attention. He pulled out his first aid kit and emergency supplies, including a small bottle of electrolyte solution. Sarah, I want you to take small sips of this, he said, handing her the bottle. Can you tell me if you've eaten anything unusual in the last 12 hours? Any berries, mushrooms, plants you might have tried? Sarah shook her head vigorously. No, nothing like that. We had energy bars and bottled water. That's it. Jake noticed that neither of them had any food containers or water bottles with them now. Where are your supplies? Marcus gestured vaguely toward the trees. We dropped our day pack when Sarah started feeling sick. We were in such a panic to find help. The explanation felt rehearsed to Jake, but he focused on Sarah's condition. Her symptoms were worsening. The trembling had intensified, and now she was complaining of numbness spreading up her legs toward her torso. We need to get you to a hospital, Jake said firmly. This could be serious. How far is the nearest road? Marcus asked, and Jake noticed sweat beading on the man's forehead despite the cool air. 8 miles back to my truck, then another 40 minutes to town, Jake replied. But Sarah's not going to be able to hike that distance. I'll have to call for emergency evacuation. Jake pulled out his satellite communicator, one of the few devices that worked in this remote area. As he powered it up, he noticed Marcus watching him intently, almost nervously. Is that going to work out here? Marcus asked. Should. It's satellite-based. Jake began entering the emergency frequency when Sarah suddenly cried out. My arms! She gasped, spreading to my arms now. I can't feel my fingers properly. Jake's blood chilled. He'd seen these exact symptoms before, during his time in Afghanistan. A fellow soldier had been exposed to a particular type of nerve agent during a mission, and the progression had been identical, starting with the extremities, moving inward, causing trembling and numbness. But that was impossible. They were in the middle of the Montana wilderness, miles from any industrial activity or potential contamination sources, unless... Jake looked more carefully at Sarah and Marcus. Despite their claims of being lost for hours, neither showed signs of typical wilderness distress. No scratches from branches, no dirt on their expensive clothes, no exhaustion that would come from hiking 8 miles of rough terrain. Marcus, Jake said slowly, I need you to be completely honest with me. How exactly did you two get here? I told you we hiked in and got lost. From which trailhead? The one near the lake? Jake knew every trailhead within 50 miles. There was no lake access point that would put them in this location without crossing several major landmarks that any hiker would remember. Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate. She was now having difficulty speaking clearly, and the trembling had become more violent. Jake had to make a decision. Continue questioning Marcus about their suspicious story, or focus entirely on getting Sarah medical help. He chose Sarah's health. Whatever was happening here, whatever Marcus might be hiding, could wait until after they got Sarah to safety. I'm calling for emergency helicopter evacuation, Jake announced, continuing his work with the satellite communicator. As he waited for the connection to establish, Jake's trained eye continued to assess the situation. Something metallic caught his attention near the tree line, partially hidden under some fallen branches. It looked like it might be equipment of some kind, definitely not natural to the forest environment. The satellite phone crackled to life.
Emergency services. This is Jake Morrison. Coordinates.
He rattled off their GPS position. I have a female, approximately 30 years old, experiencing what appears to be progressive neurological symptoms.
Trembling, numbness, potential nerve involvement. Requesting immediate medical evacuation. The dispatcher's voice came through clearly despite the distance. Copy that, Mr. Rettier. Morrison, we have a helicopter available, but weather conditions are marginal. ETA approximately 45 minutes if conditions hold. No, 45 minutes. Jake looked at Sarah, whose condition seemed to worsen by the minute. He wasn't sure she had 45 minutes. Understood, he replied. Patient condition is deteriorating. Please advise the medical team to prepare for potential toxic exposure. Toxic exposure? The dispatcher asked. Can you clarify? Jake glanced at Marcus, who had gone very pale. Unknown substance, symptoms consistent with neurological toxin. After ending the call, Jake turned his full attention back to Sarah. Her breathing had become more labored, and she was struggling to maintain consciousness. Sarah, I need you to stay awake, Jake said firmly. Talk to me. Tell me about Seattle. What do you do for work? I'm a teacher, she managed to say. Elementary school. Marcus works in technology. What kind of technology? Jake asked. but Sarah's eyes were starting to close. "Marcus," Jake said sharply, "what exactly do you do for work?" Marcus hesitated too long before answering. "Software development, nothing important." Jake's instincts screamed that Marcus was lying, but Sarah chose that moment to have what looked like a seizure. Her entire body began convulsing, and Jake had to use all his wilderness medicine training to keep her airway clear and prevent her from injuring herself. As he worked to stabilize Sarah, Jake's mind raced. The metallic object in the trees, Marcus's evasive answers, the suspicious circumstances of how they'd arrived in such a remote location, and now Sarah's rapidly progressing neurological symptoms. It all pointed to something far more sinister than a hiking accident. But what could it be? And more importantly, was Sarah going to survive long enough for the helicopter to arrive? The trembling in Sarah's legs had now spread throughout her entire body, and Jake realized with growing horror that he might be witnessing something that would change his understanding of what dangers truly lurked in these mountains he thought he knew so well. The sound of the approaching helicopter's rotors cut through the mountain air like a mechanical heartbeat, but Jake wasn't sure Sarah would be conscious to hear it. Her condition had deteriorated rapidly in the 30 minutes since he'd made the emergency call. The convulsions had stopped, but now she was barely responsive, her breathing shallow and irregular. Jake had done everything he could with his wilderness first aid training. He positioned her in the recovery position, monitored her vitals as best he could with his basic equipment, and kept talking to her to try to maintain some level of consciousness. But whatever was affecting her nervous system was progressing faster than he'd ever seen with any natural toxin. Marcus had grown increasingly agitated as the helicopter approached. He kept pacing the small clearing, checking his watch, and glancing nervously toward the tree line where Jake had spotted that metallic object earlier. "The helicopter's almost here," Jake announced, though Sarah showed no sign of hearing him. He turned to Marcus. "You'll need to give the medical team a complete account of everything that happened before I found you too." "I already told you everything," Marcus said quickly. "We got lost hiking, and Sarah started feeling sick." Jake studied the man's face. In his years of military service and wilderness guiding, he'd learned to read people pretty well. Marcus was definitely hiding something, and his nervousness seemed to increase as rescue approached rather than decrease. The helicopter appeared over the ridge, a bright red and white medical evacuation aircraft that Jake recognized as one from the Regional Trauma Center in Billings. The pilot circled the clearing once, assessing the landing zone, before setting down in a whirlwind of rotor wash that sent pine needles and dust swirling through the air. 2 paramedics jumped out while the pilot kept the engines running. Jake recognized the lead medic, a woman named Carol Martinez who'd worked several rescues with him over the years. "What do we have, Jake?" Carol called out as she approached with her medical kit. "Female, early 30s, progressive neurological symptoms," Jake reported, falling into the professional tone he'd learned in the military. "Started with numbness and trembling in extremities, progressed rapidly to full body involvement, seizure activity, now barely conscious." Carol began her assessment immediately, checking Sarah's pupils, pulse, and breathing. Her partner, a younger man Jake didn't recognize, started setting up monitoring equipment. "Any idea what might have caused this?" Carol asked as she worked. Jake glanced at Marcus before answering. "Unknown. They claim to have been hiking, but something doesn't add up about their story." Carol looked up sharply. Jake's instincts had proven reliable in the past, and she trusted his judgment. "What kind of inconsistencies?" "No equipment, no signs of actual hiking. Story doesn't match the terrain or access points," Jake said quietly, keeping his voice low so Marcus couldn't hear over the helicopter noise. Meanwhile, the younger paramedic was having trouble getting readings on Sarah's neurological responses. "Her reflexes are almost completely absent," he called to Carol. "Blood pressure is dropping, and her breathing is getting more shallow. We need to get her to the trauma center immediately. Jake, are you coming with us?" "I'll follow in my truck," Jake replied. "But I want to secure this scene first." Carol nodded, understanding the implication. If this wasn't an accident, the area might contain evidence that could help determine what had happened to Sarah. As the medical team prepared Sarah for transport, Jake approached Marcus again. "You'll need to come to the hospital to provide information to the doctors. I can give you a ride." Marcus hesitated. "Actually, I should probably get back to our car. We left it at the trailhead, and—" "Which trailhead?" Jake pressed. Marcus gestured vaguely toward the north. "The one near the old mining road." Jake knew there was no trailhead accessed by the old mining road. It had been closed to public access for over a decade due to environmental concerns. His suspicion deepened. "We'll sort out the vehicle situation later," Jake said firmly. Right now, Sarah needs you at the hospital. The helicopter lifted off with Sarah and one paramedic aboard, while Carol stayed behind to help coordinate ground transportation for Marcus. Jake watched the aircraft disappear over the mountains, carrying away the one person who might have answers about what had really happened. With the helicopter gone, the clearing fell into an eerie quiet broken only by the wind in the pines. Jake turned his attention to the metallic object he'd spotted earlier, telling Carol and Marcus he needed to check the area for any hazards before they left. What he found made his blood run cold. Partially buried under fallen branches and forest debris was a small metal cylinder, about the size of a soda can, with warning labels and text that made Jake's military training slam into high alert. The cylinder was made of stainless steel, with specialized fittings that he recognized as laboratory equipment. More importantly, the warning symbols on its side indicated hazardous chemical contents. Jake carefully photographed the cylinder with his phone without disturbing it, then backed away. He'd seen similar containers during his military service. They were used for transporting or storing dangerous chemical compounds, often for research purposes, or, in darker applications, for weapons development. But what was it doing in the middle of the Montana wilderness? And how did it connect to Sarah's mysterious illness? Jake's mind raced through possibilities. Had Marcus and Sarah stumbled upon some kind of illegal dumping site? Was this connected to the old mining operations in the area? Or was the cylinder's presence here somehow deliberate? He looked back toward Marcus, who was talking quietly with Carol near the edge of the clearing. From this distance, Jake could see that Marcus kept checking his watch and appeared increasingly anxious. Jake made a decision that would later prove crucial. Using his satellite phone, he called not just the local sheriff's office, but also a contact he'd maintained from his military days, a man named Colonel Robert Hayes who worked in chemical weapons detection for the Department of Defense. "Bob, it's Jake Morrison," he said when the call connected. "I'm in the Montana backcountry, and I've got a situation that needs your expertise." Jake: "It's been years. What's going on?" Jake quickly described the scene. Sarah's symptoms, the mysterious cylinder, and Marcus's suspicious behavior. As he spoke, he could hear Colonel Hayes becoming more alert. "Jake, listen to me very carefully," Hayes said when Jake finished. "Don't let anyone else approach that cylinder. The symptoms you're describing could match several extremely dangerous nerve agents. If someone has been exposed to a military-grade toxin, this could be a matter of national security. You think this is terrorism? I think this could be a lot of things, none of them good. I'm going to make some calls and get a hazmat team dispatched to your location immediately. In the meantime, keep everyone away from that cylinder and don't let the male subject out of your sight." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "You think he's involved? I think his behavior patterns match someone who knows more than he's telling. Jake, be very careful. If this is what I think it might be, you could be dealing with someone extremely dangerous." After ending the call, Jake walked back to where Carol and Marcus were waiting. He noticed that Marcus seemed to be growing more agitated by the minute. "Ready to head down to the hospital?" Jake asked casually. Marcus shook his head. "You know what? I just remembered I need to get back to our car. Sarah has her insurance cards and medical information in her purse, and the doctors will need that." It was a reasonable explanation, but Jake's trained instincts told him it was another lie. "No problem," he said. "Carol, why don't you head back to town and coordinate with the hospital? Marcus and I will retrieve their vehicle and meet you there." Carol looked between the two men, sensing the tension in the air. "Jake, are you sure that's the best plan?" "Absolutely," Jake said with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "We'll be right behind you." As Carol's vehicle disappeared down the mountain trail, Jake found himself alone in the wilderness with a man he increasingly suspected of being involved in whatever had nearly killed Sarah. The metallic cylinder lay hidden just 50 yards away, potentially containing enough chemical poison to kill dozens of people. "So," Jake said, adjusting his rifle strap in a way that wasn't quite threatening but wasn't entirely casual either, "why don't you show me exactly where you left your car?" Marcus's eyes darted toward the tree line where the cylinder was hidden, then back to Jake. For just a moment, his carefully constructed story seemed to crack, and Jake saw something in the man's expression that confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a hiking mishap, and Sarah's life hung in the balance of whatever truth Marcus was hiding in these mountains. Jake realized that his routine elk hunt had suddenly become something much more dangerous, a race against time, to uncover the truth before whatever had poisoned Sarah claimed another victim. The walk through the forest felt like the longest mile of Jake's life. Marcus led the way, claiming to remember the route back to their parked car, but Jake noticed that the man's sense of direction seemed remarkably poor for someone who had allegedly hiked 8 miles of wilderness terrain just hours before. Every few minutes, Marcus would stop and look around with apparent confusion. "I thought it was this way," he'd mutter, then change direction slightly. Jake followed, but his hand never strayed far from the radio on his belt. Colonel Hayes had promised that a hazmat team was en route, but in these remote mountains, en route could mean several hours.
"Marcus," Jake said after they'd been walking for 20 minutes. "I've been hunting these mountains for over 20 years.
There's no road access anywhere in the direction we're heading." Marcus stopped walking and turned around. For the first time since Jake had met him, the carefully maintained facade of confused hiker began to slip away entirely. You don't understand," Marcus said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "I need to get to the car. You don't, you do, and F. There are things, important things that Sarah needs." "What kind of things?" Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that seemed to age him 10 years in seconds. "Medical supplies, antidotes, equipment that could save her life." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Antidotes?" "Marcus, what exactly happened to Sarah?" For several long moments, Marcus said nothing. He stood in the middle of the forest path, looking like a man wrestling with an impossible decision. Finally, he seemed to crumble. "We weren't hiking," he admitted quietly. "We're researchers, chemical researchers working on a government contract." "What kind of government contract?" "Development of chemical detection systems," Marcus said, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had burst. "Sarah specializes in nerve agent identification. We were field testing a new detection device when something went wrong." Jake's military training kicked in immediately. "What kind of something went wrong?" Marcus pointed back toward the clearing where Jake had found them. "We had samples, tiny amounts of various chemical compounds for testing the detection equipment. One of the sample containers leaked." "The metal cylinder I found?" Marcus looked startled.
"You found it?"
"I found it, photographed it, and called in a hazmat team," Jake said firmly. "Now tell me exactly what Sarah was exposed to." Marcus sat down heavily on a fallen log, his head in his hands. "VX derivative, a modified version developed for detection training. It's supposed to be less lethal than the original, but clearly something went wrong with the formulation." Jake's blood turned to ice. VX was one of the most deadly chemical weapons ever developed. Even a microscopic amount could kill within minutes. If Sarah had been exposed to anything in that family of compounds, she might already be beyond saving. "How much was she exposed to?" "I don't know," Marcus said miserably. "The container was damaged when we arrived at the test site yesterday evening. Sarah didn't realize anything was wrong until this morning when the symptoms started."
"Yesterday evening."
Jake's voice sharpened. "You two have been out here for over 12 hours?
"We were supposed to meet an extraction team this morning, but Sarah got too sick to travel."
"I've been trying to reach our contact on the radio, but the equipment got damaged when we had to abandon our base camp." Jake's mind raced through the implications. If Marcus was telling the truth, then Sarah had been slowly poisoning herself for nearly 15 hours. But more importantly, if there was legitimate antidote equipment somewhere nearby, it might not be too late to save her. "Where's your base camp?" Marcus pointed toward a ridge about half a mile to the west. "There's a small cabin up there. We were using it as a temporary lab facility." Jake had never seen any cabin in that area, but he knew there were several old mining structures scattered throughout these mountains. Some had been converted for various uses over the years. "Show me," Jake commanded. They changed direction, climbing upward through increasingly dense forest. As they walked, Marcus continued his confession. "Sarah and I have been working on this project for 8 months," he said. "The goal was to create portable detection equipment that could identify nerve agents in the field within seconds instead of hours. It could save thousands of lives if there was ever a terrorist attack." "So what went wrong?" "The sample preparation," Marcus admitted. "We were trying to create test samples that would trigger our detection equipment without being immediately lethal, but the chemical modification process was more complex than we anticipated." Jake could see a structure ahead through the trees. It was indeed an old cabin, probably built during the mining boom of the early 1900s, but clearly renovated recently. Solar panels on the roof and a satellite dish told him that Marcus hadn't been lying about having sophisticated equipment. As they approached the cabin, Jake noticed several things that made him feel both relieved and more worried. There were indeed government license plates on a vehicle parked behind the building.
But there were also hazmat suits hanging on a line outside and warning signs posted on the cabin door. "Is it safe to go inside?" Jake asked.
Marcus nodded. "The contamination was limited to the test area near the clearing where you found us. We followed proper decontamination protocols before returning to base camp." Inside the cabin, Jake saw equipment he recognized from his military days: chemical detection devices, communication gear, and most importantly, a medical kit that looked far more sophisticated than anything a typical hiker would carry. "The antidotes," Jake said urgently. "What do you have?" Marcus opened the medical kit, revealing several auto-injector pens and vials of clear liquid, atropine, pralidoxime, and an experimental compound that's supposed to counteract the modified VX we were working with. "How long does Sarah have?" Marcus checked his watch with shaking hands. "Based on the exposure level and the timeline of her symptoms, maybe 2 hours. 3 at the outside." Jake grabbed his satellite phone and immediately called the hospital. When he reached the emergency department, he asked to speak with Carol Martinez. "Carol, it's Jake. I'm with Marcus at a research facility in the mountains. Sarah was exposed to a modified VX nerve agent, and we have potential antidotes here." "Jesus, Jake. VX, are you sure?" "Marcus is a government researcher. He's got atropine, pralidoxime, and some kind of experimental antidote. Can you patch me through to the doctor treating Sarah?" Within minutes, Jake found himself in a three-way conversation with Marcus and Dr. Parthakadigan. Elizabeth Patel, a toxicology specialist who had been called in to treat Sarah. "Her condition is critical but stable." "Dr. Borley," Patel reported. "We've been treating her symptoms, but without knowing the exact toxin. We've been working blind." "Doctor, this is Marcus Chen, project lead for the chemical detection research. I'm going to give you the exact compound formulation and the antidote protocols." For the next 10 minutes, Marcus provided detailed medical information, while Dr. Patel took notes. Jake listened in growing amazement as Marcus rattled off chemical formulas, dosage calculations, and treatment timelines with the precision of someone who clearly knew exactly what he was talking about. "We can helicopter the antidotes to you," Jake offered. But Dr. Patel had a different idea. "Actually, based on what Dr. Chen is telling me, I think we can synthesize what we need here. We have atropine and pralidoxime in our pharmacy, and the experimental compound he's describing sounds like something we can create with our lab facilities." "Will it work?" Jake asked. "It should, Dr. Patel said. "The timing is critical. We need to start treatment within the next hour." After ending the call, Jake turned to Marcus with a mixture of anger and understanding. "You should have told me the truth from the beginning." "I know," Marcus said quietly. "But this is classified research. I wasn't authorized to discuss it with civilians." "Even to save Sarah's life?" "Especially to save Sarah's life. If this technology gets into the wrong hands," Marcus gestured toward the equipment in the cabin, "this detection system could be reverse engineered to create better chemical weapons." Jake understood the dilemma, but he was still angry about the deception. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," Marcus said, "and hope the hospital can replicate our antidote in time." Jake's satellite phone rang. It was Colonel Hayes. "Jake, we've got a full hazmat team 20 minutes out from your location, but I need to know, is this an accidental exposure or something more serious?" Jake looked at Marcus, who nodded permission to explain the situation. "It's accidental, Bob. Government research project that went wrong. The subject is already at the hospital and they're working on treatment." "Copy that. We'll still need to secure the contaminated area and decontaminate the site. Are you and the other subjects safe?" "We're at the research base camp with proper equipment." After providing Colonel Hayes with GPS coordinates for both the contaminated clearing and the cabin, Jake sat down to wait for news from the hospital. Marcus busied himself with securing the research equipment and preparing incident reports that would apparently go to several different government agencies. "Marcus," Jake said after a long silence, "why do this work? Why develop ways to detect things that should never exist in the first place?" Marcus looked up from his paperwork. "Because they do exist, whether we want them to or not. Chemical weapons, biological agents, radiological materials, they're out there. The question isn't whether bad people will try to use them. The question is whether good people will be ready to detect and respond when they do." Jake thought about that as they waited. In his military service, he'd seen the aftermath of chemical attacks. He'd met refugees who'd fled areas where nerve agents had been used against civilian populations. Maybe Marcus and Sarah's work, dangerous as it was, could prevent those kinds of tragedies in the future. The satellite phone rang again. It was Dr. Patel. "We've started the antidote treatment," she reported. "Sarah's responding well. Her neurological function is already improving, and her vital signs are stabilizing." Jake felt a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "She's going to be okay." "It looks like it. The treatment protocols Dr. Chen provided were exactly what she needed. She should make a full recovery." Raw. Parents with a great heart to take command of it. For the first time since Jake had met him, the man looked genuinely calm. "There's one more thing, Dr. Frigel," Patel added. "Sarah's been asking for both of you. She wants to thank the hunter who saved her life." Jake looked out the cabin window toward the clearing where he'd found them just hours earlier. What had started as a routine elk hunt had turned into something far more complex and dangerous than he could have imagined. But Sarah was alive. The contamination site would be properly cleaned up by the hazmat team. And maybe, just maybe, the research that had nearly killed her would someday save other lives. As the sound of helicopters approached through the mountain air, the hazmat team arriving to secure the area, Jake realized that sometimes the most important hunting you do in the wilderness has nothing to do with elk or deer. Sometimes you're hunting for the truth. And sometimes, if you're lucky and skilled and persistent enough, you actually find it in time to make a difference. Sarah would recover fully. The research project would be redesigned with better safety protocols, and Jake Morrison would have a story that would make even the most experienced hunters in Pine Ridge shake their heads in amazement. But more importantly, he would have the satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered most, his years of wilderness experience, military training, and simple human decency had combined to save a life in the place he loved most. The vast, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying wilderness of the Montana Rockies. "My legs keep trembling," she cried. The hunter bent down and uncovered the terrifying truth.